Puss in Boots. There once was a miller who had 3 sons, and when he died he had arranged for his possessions to be divided. He gave his mill to the eldest son, his donkey to the second, and his cat to the youngest. Each of the brothers took what belonged to him. The poor young boy, who had nothing but the cat, complained.
"My brothers,"
he said,
"by joining their possessions together may do well in the world, but for me, what am I to do with a cat?"
The cat, who all this time sat listening just inside the door of a cupboard, now ventured out and said,
"Do not worry yourself, my good master. You have only to give me a bag and get a pair of boots made for me, so that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that you are not so ill provided for as you imagine."
Though the cat's master did not trust these promises much, he did as requested. When the cat had obtained what he asked for, he began to dress himself and marched off. The first attempt the dear cat made was to go into a warren in which there lived a great number of rabbits. He put some bran and some parsley into his bag, and then stretching himself out at full length as if he was dead, he waited for some young rabbits, hoping they would be tricked into his bag by the parsley and the bran. Soon a young rabbit crept into the bag, and the cat immediately drew the strings, trapping it inside. The clever cat made his way to the palace, where he asked to speak to the king. On being shown in, he made a low bow and said,
"I have brought you, sire, this rabbit from the lands of my lord the Marquis of Carabas, who commanded me to present it to your majesty as a sign of his respect."
"Tell my lord Marquis of Carabas,"
replied the king,
"that I accept his gift with pleasure, and send my thanks."
Soon after, the cat laid himself down in the same manner in a field of corn, and had as much good fortune as before, for 2 fine partridges got into his bag, which he carried to the palace. The king received them as he had done the rabbit, and ordered his servants to give the messenger something to drink. The sly cat continued these gifts once a week to the king. One day, the cat, having heard that the king intended to take a ride that morning by the river's side with his daughter, who was the most beautiful princess in the world, said to his master,
"If you would but follow my advice, your fortune is made. Take off your clothes and bathe yourself in the river, just in the place I shall show you, and leave the rest to me."
The Marquis of Carabas, as dubbed by the cat, did exactly as he was asked, without being able to guess at what the cat intended. While he was bathing, the king passed by, and Puss in Boots called out as loud as he could,
"Help! Oh, help! Help! My lord Marquis of Carabas is in danger of being drowned."
The king, hearing the cries, put his head out at the window of his carriage to see what was the matter, when, perceiving the very cat who had brought him so many gifts, he ordered his attendants to go help the Lord Marquis of Carabas. While they pulled the unknowing man out of the river, the cat ran to the king's carriage and told his majesty that while his master was bathing, some thieves had run off with his clothes as they lay by the river's side. The cunning cat, all the time, having hid them under a large stone. The king, hearing this, commanded the officers of his wardrobe to fetch one of the finest suits and present it to the Marquis of Carabas, and fussed over him immensely. As the fine clothes they brought him made him look like a gentleman, The king's daughter was taken by his appearance, and the Marquis of Carabas had no sooner cast upon her 2 or 3 respectful glances than she gazed at him dreamily. The king insisted on his getting into the carriage and taking a ride with them. The cat, enchanted to see how well his scheme was likely to succeed, ran before to a meadow that was reaping, and said to the reapers,
"Good people, the king is on his way, and as he passes by you, you are to tell him that the land you are working belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, and if you don't, you will endure a fate worse than death."
The king did not fail to ask the reapers to whom the meadow belonged.
To my lord Marquis of Carabas,
they all said at once, for the threats of the cat had terribly frightened them.
You have here a very fine piece of land, my lord Marquis,
said the king.
Truly, sire,
Replied he.
the land I own surprises me too, every year.
The cat continued to go on ahead of the carriage, giving the same instructions and making the same threats to all the people he met with, so that the king was greatly astonished at the splendid fortune of the Marquis of Carabas. The cat then arrived at a castle which belonged to an ogre, the richest ever known. For all the lands the king had passed through and admired was his. The cat, having learned of the ogre from the people in the fields he had threatened, entered the castle and asked to meet with the ogre. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do.
"I have been informed,"
said the cat,
"that you have the gift of changing yourself to all sorts of animals, into a lion or an elephant, for example."
It is true indeed.
replied the ogre, somewhat proud.
And to convince you, I will directly take the form of a lion.
The cat stared back in astonishment. Finding that he could use it to his advantage, the cat said,
"My dear, I was terrified to my boots. How frightening indeed!"
The ogre smiled smugly.
"I was also told that you could transform into smaller animals,"
continued the cat.
"but after seeing you as a lion and so enormous, I confess I should think this impossible, that you could now be just a small animal like a rodent."
Impossible? How dare you? I will show you, and then you will regret it.
And in an instant he changed himself into a mouse and began to hop about the room. The cat no sooner cast his eyes upon the ogre in this form than he sprang upon him and devoured him in an instant. In the meantime, the king, admiring as he came near it the magnificent castle of the ogre, ordered his attendants to drive up to the gates, as he wished to take a closer view of it. The cat, hearing the noise of the carriage on the drawbridge, immediately came out, saying,
"Your Majesty is welcome to the castle of my Lord Marquis of Carabas."
And is this splendid castle yours also, my Lord Marquis of Carabas? How magnificent indeed.
The king stepped out of the carriage, heading inside the castle. The Marquis, suddenly very comfortable with his new title, gave his hand to the young princess, and the two followed the king. They oohed and ahed at the beauty within, for, of course, the ogre had no trouble in ensuring that the servants kept the castle spotless and pristine at all times. The king was so much charmed with all that he saw that he knew that if this said Marquis married into a different kingdom, the wealth he had would be lost to the king, and so, determined to keep the wealth nearer to him, walked out onto a balcony, leaving his daughter alone with the Marquis, hoping that the two would be freer to acknowledge their fondness for each other. Within a year, the poor peasant had become a prince, marrying the king's lovely daughter. The workers who had been threatened by Puss in Boots were happier to have the young man as their lord instead of the ogre, and considered him indeed their prince. The prince and princess lived on for many years with their trusted cat at their side. And dear Puss in Boots? He hung up his boots for a velvet pillow and lived happily ever after.